The current polling for the US presidential election later this year does not look good for Trump. Before Biden was unceremoniously ditched by the Democrats as a liability, Trump was massacring him in the polls. Almost every national poll put him ahead. Then along comes Harris, the polls take a few days to catch up, and Harris starts massacring Trump. This doesn't take into account a couple of things, however. One is that the polls in the 2020 election were spectacularly inaccurate and only in one direction. Only 5 states out of the 50 had polls predicting either a bigger Trump win or a smaller Biden win than actually happened. In all the other 45 states, Trump won by more, or Biden won by less, than the polls predicted. The pluses there relate to Trump either leading in the polls or winning. He led by 19 and won by 25 in Alabama, and the minuses to him trailing in the polls or losing. He trailed Biden by 29.3 in California and lost by almost that margin. The number in brackets is the number of polls that the given plus or minus number is the average of. Some are just based on one poll, some as many as 10. The Florida number is based on 10 polls, and they still had Trump losing in Florida. Anyway, the point is, only 2 states here, Colorado and Georgia, ultimately saw bigger Biden wins, and so bigger Trump losses, than were predicted by the polls. And Georgia was minuscule. And on the next page, only Maryland saw a bigger Trump loss than the polls suggested. So in just 3 states, polls predicted smaller Biden wins than actually came to pass. And in Georgia, if you actually take the average of the previous 10 polls rather than 5, that Trump minus 0.2 becomes minus 0.8, giving Trump again a bigger deficit than the actual result. And in Louisiana and Mississippi, just 2 states, Trump won by less than was predicted by the polls. And as you can see at the bottom, Trump's overall losing margin was exaggerated in the polls by 3.5%. Polls said 8%, actual was just 4.5%. So in 45 out of 50 states, for whatever reason, whether it be just polling incompetence or a desire to prick the MAGA bubble, the polls either overstated Biden's winning margin or understated Trump's. So as things stand, ignoring all of that, if the ultimate result is reflected in the current polls, this is how things will look. Trump loses North Carolina, he gains Nevada, and ends up 298 Harris, 240 Trump. But now factor in the assumption, and it might be a big assumption because they might have corrected their errors, who knows, that the current polls are as wrong as they were last time, so Trump edges up across the board, uniform totally, by 3.5%. Trump gets North Carolina back and gains Virginia, Pennsylvania, Michigan and Arizona, and he wins at 314 to 224. But there is another factor which requires you to be glued to your screens at 7 p.m. UK time today. Read it and weep. I am going to address the nation this Friday. There is rabid speculation that Kennedy is going to end his election campaign and endorse Trump. He probably has about 5% of voters whose vote will then be freed up. So conventional wisdom, by which I mean the wisdom as expressed in this article, which I suspect is largely accurate, is that Kennedy's votes tend to favour Trump by between 1 and 2%, assuming a simple freeing up of the votes, i.e. Kennedy says, I'm stepping out, hey lads, do whatever you want. But if he endorses Trump and he says something like, if you were planning on voting for me, I now advocate that you vote for Trump, that could have a much bigger effect. And rather than that map, which assumes the polls are underrepresenting Trump support to the extent they did in 2020, you could be looking at this one where New Hampshire and Wisconsin flip to Trump, but he also picks up Minnesota, Oregon and New Mexico and goes 351 to 187, which would be a Trump landslide. And it would be a kind of a rigged election, because Kennedy would be taking his faithful voter base, the people who listen to him, who like him, who look to him for advice, and not saying, hey, do whatever you like, but vote for Trump. And those are people who could, without Kennedy's influence, have easily leaned towards Harris, which could be seen as a kind of vote rigging situation. Obviously these quit then endorse a given candidate happens all the time in US politics, but this is a very crucial time for it to be happening. And since the 2020 election was rigged by Twitter, which covered up the Hunter Biden laptop scandal, and that isn't speculation, that's actual fact, a scandal that could easily have swung so many votes away from Biden that Trump could have won. This would be very poetic justice indeed. Twitter rigs the 2020 election and causes Trump to lose by hiding key information. Then Kennedy uses Twitter and the other social media to, in effect, rig the 2024 election and help Trump to win. That would be extremely poetic justice. I cannot, of course, guarantee that the final electoral college map will look exactly like this, but it could be quite close, and highly dependent on whether or not Kennedy gets behind Trump. And unless you're one of the first people to see this video in the first few hours it goes up, that decision will probably have been taken when you watch this video.